I'm going to take a break this week from talking about the rules and conduct of fighting to do a review of the Mage Knight board game. Now, I'm really excited about this board game for two reasons. One, it's a pretty good game in and of itself. Secondly, the reason this board game is coming out is because Mage Knight 3.0 is in the works, and I'm excited to see if they can bring back the Mage Knight game and have it not be terrible. Mage Knight was the first miniatures game I ever played. I still think the idea behind Mage Knight was really good, but some of the balancing issues towards the end just killed the game for me, and apparently everyone else because the game stopped being produced. So, we're going to talk about everything Mage Knight. First, this is the Mage Knight Castle. When these came out, they were ridiculously expensive, like $25, $30 for each, which to somebody used to playing a modern war game is not very expensive, but for people who are used to paying $7 to $10 for a Mage Knight booster pack, it seemed ridiculously excessive. These come pre-done, pre-painted, pre-assembled, everything. I don't think they're being publicly sold anymore. You can buy them on eBay pretty much in bulk. The only one that's hard to find is the wall kit, which is necessary to connect all of them together. I find when I'm trying to use them in other games like 40k or War Machine, I actually don't want that many walls because it's kind of weird to have huge line of sight blocking terrain. But throwing a couple of towers in there adds a lot of dimension to it. They also have these like nice usable surfaces on the top. There's this knob that you could break off here. I haven't messed with that just for old time's sake. But it doesn't get in the way that badly, so you can actually place people up here really nicely. And on the back of the walls, they have this slot where you can plug in something that people can stand on. It's big enough for Space Marines or even like medium jacks to stand on. So these things are great for terrain. You can get them really cheap online. They were released originally for Mage Knight. I highly recommend picking up some of them if you do any sort of miniature war game. Alright, let's talk about the main event. The Mage Knight board game just came out. Looks like this. This is $75. I picked up my copy of Dragon's Lair. It's where I get all of my stuff. The God, I'm terrible with names. Vlada Shavaltil. That's not like a in-character, in-fluff thing. That's the name of the guy who designed the game. I'll come back to that in a minute. Have a nice production value on this. All of the artwork and everything is real top-notch on this game. Yeah, when you first get it, it will come in sort of a plastic thing like this. Everything will be divided up. You have huge stacks of cards. This is me after I plastic bagged everything. A bunch of little tokens like this. And the terrain, the map setup, works on a hex-based system, so you get a bunch of different hexes like this. I'll pull out a couple to show you guys what they look like. See, it's like this. They have features on them, like this one has a keep and a mountain and a ruin. This one has a monastery on it. What you do is you turn over these tiles and then you put little tokens on them to represent what it is. So you get a randomly generated map which has random iterations of certain types of events on it. So it's a pretty cool map building system. I like it. Let's get to the actual figures that come with it. The Draconis guy. This guy apparently is an Atlantean Knight. I want to say this chick is with the Necropolis sect, which would make sense based on the way she looks. And you have your obligatory High Elf Knights Immortal guy. Okay, you'll notice that none of those guys have clicks on their base. The only clicky things are in these cities, which only come into play in pretty much after the first game. You find them and you can change their characteristics using the old click system. It has a dial, and when you turn it, it adds more stuff to it. Something I noticed right away is this is not the clicks that they've used for any system before. The original Mage Knight clicks had sort of a bottom link system like this, which meant you had to grab the figure and turn it like that. That was originally changed to the more advanced version, which was on the bottom so that you didn't accidentally break the guy off the top. So you would grab it like that, and kind of turn it on the bottom like that. And you can tell what the new ones look like because they have the double cross on the bottom of them. This uses a totally different one that I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of. It has kind of the top of the new style bases, and this bottom is kind of weird. I think you're supposed to grab the bottom and turn it like that, and that's how it is. But, I mean, I can't do it without turning it sideways, so I'm not a huge fan of the redesign of the bases. It was also kind of weird to me that none of the figures themselves use clicks, but I want to take a second to talk about the evolution of the aesthetic from the original to 2.0 to the board game. Brought in a couple of the original guys. You got the Magus, the Utum Guardsmen, the Blade Golem. The Atlantean Empire's whole thing was that they were good with Mage Stones, which they could use to power these golems. That in opposition to the Black Powder Rebels, who used gunpowder and steam to do just straight up steampunk style golems. So magic users versus gun users. No mention in the early game of Black Powder Rebels, so I'm not sure if that's a feature which is going to be carried over into the new game. You can see there's a big difference between this guy, who apparently speaks for Atlantis, and like the Utum Guardsman, or Magus, or Golem. There are cards that represent the Utum in here, and they have art which is very reminiscent of that figure. The mages have been updated. They look a little sleeker, a little bit more Magic the Gathering style than the original mages. Blade golems and this whole golem aesthetic are pretty much gone from the game now. They just kind of look like metal monsters. So I wasn't happy about that because I like the way these guys look. What I was happy about is a lot of old school bad guys making it into the game. This is a Chaos Mage. If anybody played the original Mage Knight, they remember this guy. He was put into the base set just to mess with people. All the Mage Knight figures followed a point value formula except for this guy, whose point value was actually transposed from what it should have been. So this guy's cool and he's in the game. As are the Ironclad, one of the figures that came out later that I thought was awesome. And some other ones from Dungeons, like the Cryptworm, the two-mouthed guy. Really cool bad guy, he's in the game as well. So a lot of the bad guys are recognizable from the original kind of storyline and fluff. Something I thought was interesting is the High Elven Warrior from 2.0 of the Knights Immortal. He is, as far as I can tell, exactly the same. Yeah, look exactly the same, they're just painted a little differently. So, that's something to keep in mind. I guess they like the way that one looked. And I have one of the old school dragons. You can see the old aesthetic is kind of dark and streamlined, and then you have the new one from 2.0, which has a lot more detail, a lot more angular features. That was kind of true of everything. All of the 2.0 resculpts had darker things and more texture on them. And then you can compare that to the 3.0 version of the dragon, which looks a lot brighter and friendlier. Alright, let's talk about the rules. These are my major problem with the game. Not a lot of work went into producing and proofreading these rules and make sure it was easy for new players to pick up the game. In fact, the rulebook right here has this big disclaimer which says you should probably not try and learn the rules by reading the rulebook. Instead, they include a walkthrough which is supposed to go phase by phase through the first 2 turns in the normal game and kind of explain how it's done. So they have a special scenario for the first game that you play that's supposed to be sort of a tutorial, and a lot of the advanced features like character-on-character combat are by default disallowed. This gets really bad because they did not do very good vetting between the 2 documents. That is, this rulebook, if all you had was this, you would be missing substantial chunks of the rules which only appear in the walkthrough. So the rulebook will say things like, do it in the normal way, and the normal way is explained in the walkthrough, which to me is kind of a ripoff. If I pay $75 for a game, I expect a lot of work to go into editing all of the documents, making sure they make sense. I'm also the kind of person who would just sit down with a super complicated rulebook and memorize the whole thing and then play the game based on that. If you tried to do that, it wouldn't work. You can't. This is the walkthrough document. It's pretty long. It's actually 20 pages. A lot of it you don't really need to know right off the bat. There's whole sections which are what happens when you reveal different terrain features like a mage tower, a monastery, a monster den, all of that. Those are random events, so if you don't know what happens ahead of time, that's not a huge thing because that shouldn't really be determining your strategy anyway. Something that I don't like that they didn't mention up front is the scoring. If you've ever played something like Settlers of Catan, you know there's conventional ways to accrue victory points, and then at the end of the game there's sort of objectives that you can fulfill, like the longest road, that sort of thing. So the end game really isn't about doing the conventional building blocks of winning the game, it's about fulfilling specific objectives. There's a parallel to this, different things to get you fame points that are pretty specific and you wouldn't necessarily do unless you knew that they existed. So one of the things I'm going to recommend before you start playing these games is you find the rule card for objectives. You find the rules cards for objectives. It says achievement bonuses on the top, and it has a bunch of like kind of weird, unreadable symbols. I have a feeling that once I play a couple more games with this, these symbols will make sense the same way that like the Magic the Gathering shorthand or the Settlers of Catan system symbol makes sense to me. But right now these are kind of opaque. But they're trying to say things like you get extra fame for buying spells or having advanced skills. If you conquer the most dungeons, you get points for that. And you lose points for having wounds in your deck, which is not immediately obvious. So on the last turn of the game, if you don't know that this exists, you will walk into combat, take a bunch of wounds because you think it doesn't matter if your character dies, to try and get some fame, and then you will find out that you screwed yourself. So be aware that this card exists, and when you start to get into the endgame, go to the walkthrough and read through it. The walkthrough, not the rulebook, and read through it so that you can figure out what each of these things do. The major problem with these is that they're very swingy. That is, the person who wins each category gets an incremental bonus for each part of it. Like advanced skills, you get +1 fame for every advanced skill in your deck, and if you've got the most points that way, you get +3 fame. So it's a huge jump if you're not expecting it. Alright, let's talk about the actual components of the game. These are wound cards. These represent the damage that your guy takes. There's a ton of them. This works off the mechanic that your deck of stuff that you can do gets filled up with wound cards. At the end of every turn you refill your hand back to max. You can't play wound cards, you can't discard them, they just sit in your hand and take up space. So the more wounds you take, the less your character is going to be able to do every turn, until you can come up with some way to get rid of them. Now, notice the back of the wound card. This is what it looks like. This is what all of the backs of all of the cards in the game look like. There's a reason they all have the same back. It makes sense because you have to be holding them all in your hand all at the same time. But it's kind of an organizational nightmare to originally sort out all of the decks and keep them all straight unless you're referring to a diagram all the time, because they don't look exactly the same. An easy fix to this, I mean obviously I know what a wound card looks like, but an easy fix to this would have just been to write the card type in big print on the front of it somewhere. Example, here's a spell card. They have kind of a distinctive layout, but it really would not have hurt anything to just like write spell card right here, or something like that, to make it easier to sort out. If you have excellent vision, all of the things have a tiny number down at this corner. So it's possible that you could sort them all out by number at the end of every game or something like that. That seems like kind of a pain. So I'm just going to give you an idea of how many different types of cards there are. Spell cards. They have 2 effects. Normal one, powerful one you can only use at night. Every character has skill cards. These let you do basic stuff like move around, fight, attack, defend yourself. These are basically the currency that you spend in the game. There's also this deck, which is advanced skill cards. These are ones that your guy gets by gaining levels. There's a fully functional leveling system where your guy gets more skills and abilities and becomes a better leader so you can recruit more minions. It's a well thought out system. I really like it. So advanced skill cards are a big part of it. Artifacts or magical items you can pick up. These are kind of hard to get a hold of, at least in the first couple of games. So they're not a huge deal, they're just another stack of cards on the table. They have a continuous effect or a sacrifice to get a strong one-off effect. Then you have minion cards. I don't remember what they're called. I'm going to call them minion cards. These guys are really awesome. They'll fight for you. They have 2 things that they can do, and once per day you can order them to do one of their abilities. So it's sort of a way to add more durable, kind of permanent effects to your guys, so you don't have to spend cards to do everything. In a fight, they're also pretty handy. They can soak up some damage for you, and I'd much rather my fire golem take one to the face than my hero. This is one of the areas where you can see the departure from the original game, because I don't know of anything that looked like this in the original Mage Knight. This is not something the Atlantean Empire would build. You can also They have ice golems, which are kind of weird. Fire mages look much more fire magey instead of like dudes who have trained really hard to use lightning guns, which is sort of the original aesthetic. Let's see. Some things remain mostly the same. You can see all of the foot soldiers with the lightning guns and alchemical weapons are pretty much the same deal. You also have a bunch of rule cards, little references. This looks kind of complicated and intimidating. It's like a lot of things in this game. It's hard to figure out early on, but once you kind of get a hang of it, you'll have these, like a stack of cards sitting out on the table. People will pass them around and grab them and read over them when they need to. So these are a bunch of rules that you don't really have to remember. You can, oh, I'm in town, what can I do in town? I'll grab the town card, read over it, see the 3 different things that I can do, stuff I can buy. So this is a really smart addition to the game. I really like these. Alright, and we have tactics cards. If you played Puerto Rico, it's kind of similar to that. At the beginning of every turn, you choose a tactic, which gives you a special ability and a turn order. So generally, the later in the turn you go, the more powerful the effect you have. You can see this in Early Bird, which has no special ability, you just automatically get to go first. So turn order is decided based on what tactic you take. And you decide who takes what tactic in reverse turn order. So nobody can go first every single time, it switches back and forth. These also change at night to a different set of tactics to reflect the differences between night and day. Magic is more powerful at night. During the day, it's easier to get sort of generic mana. I'll talk more about that later, but there's a difference. Every other turn will be night or day, and there's subtle gameplay differences between them. Okay, and we need to talk about the actual material that the cards are made out of, which is kind of weird. Alright. See, I'm not sure what kind of construction this is. I haven't played a board game where they use this before. That same pattern appears in all of the inserts and all of the tokens and everything. It looks like they were fabricated all using the same method. For the cards, they are not as bendy as the average cards. So some games I worry about bending, and like I know what sheep look like because they're kind of, everybody just sits with them in their hand playing with them the whole game. That won't happen with these. These are pretty durable. These are bad guy tokens, ruins, things like that. Monsters come out of these. So when you flip over a map tile that has symbols on it, based on the symbol you grab one of these, and it has stats on it. It's a bad example. Here. This doesn't work. That's perfect. This is a Chaos Shaman. So he has a defensive thing up here. His attack, he summons somebody so he doesn't have an attack, they attack for him. And how much fame you get for killing him. That's sort of the system. Defense, offense, experience. The way combat works is pretty straightforward and simple. Basically, you have to play block cards to totally overwhelm your opponent's offense, or they start dealing you damage. The actual way that they deal damage is a little bit backwards, but once you learn how it works, it goes really smoothly. All of the mechanics behind the game are pretty intuitive. Once you get them down, they flow really easily. It's just that the people who designed the game trip all over themselves when they try and explain what exactly those mechanics are, so watch out for that. This is the Fame board. It tracks your character's advancement. He gets to command more people every other level, and he gets to earn an advanced skill, which is a way of customizing your character to give him an ability he can do a certain number of times per day usually. It makes him more powerful. You have a little bit of flexibility in those. You draw 2 of them, you get to choose your favorite one, so you get to shape how your guy works. There's also ways to customize the deck of cards that he plays with, so there's a lot of strategy as far as building the type of character you want over the course of the game. There's also a reputation, what people think of you. The better they think of you, the easier it is to buy things, and eventually if they hate you, they'll just stop talking to you, so don't get there. We spent most of the game just in the middle region, because you can trade people liking you for resources, and I don't really care what villagers think of me. You win the game by being the highest one on the fame track. Remember the achievements though, those affect it. So it's cool because the person who wins is the one who's put the most effort into getting experience and customizing their character, which I think is a good way of doing it. I'm not going to go too much into the mechanics mechanics of how the actual gameplay goes because it's really complicated to explain. Not so much to do. What I'm going to do is show you how incredibly table hungry this game is. I'm going to set out the layout like it's supposed to be in a game, and you can see what I'm talking about. We just took a 20-minute break so I could set this up. That's the second time doing it. The first time it took considerably longer. When you go to play this game for the first time, expect there to be an upfront time investment. The rulebook recommends you have one person learn the rules and then have them try and explain it to everybody else. It's actually not a terrible idea, but keep in mind it's going to take a while for everybody to sort of assimilate the rules up front. So this isn't a sort of we go over, set it up and learn it in an hour and a half and then play the board game sort of thing. You need to do a little bit of prep work. Okay. This is what the board looks like. You can see that there's a huge amount of table space which is taken up just by the sort of common resources everybody has. And then over here you have the beginnings of a map. This is only 6 tiles, your starting tile, and 5 random ones. This could easily go rather larger. This is a 4x4 table that we're on right now, so you can see this is going to get big fast. It's also where the back confusion comes in, because these are all different things that look the same. So it's hard to remember, like, this is an artifact deck, and this is a spell deck, and this is a tactics deck. Particularly when tactics end up in the units queue, and weird stuff keeps happening. So this can get a little confusing unless you have the diagram on hand as needed to refer to it. So this is sort of the general idea. I've only set up one hero. This would be the turn order. He has these little shields. They work like the markers from Axis and Allies. They keep track of your position on the fame and reputation and all that. And you would get your hero, and you move him around here. And this chart here shows you how much movement it costs to go. So like if you look at this chart, it says different values for different types of terrain. So it's easy to look at that and then look at the board and figure out what you're supposed to do. Now, this is kind of what I'm talking about production value. You can see they went all out on some things, like they have these nice little crafted crystals to represent magic, and they have custom dice. This is the only random element in the game other than card drawing. These dice, which aren't that significant, they're just a resource pool, which is kind of cool, so not a lot of dice rolling. So they did a lot of work on elements like that, but they don't have a game mat or any sort of way to easily organize this. So you can see you have to set all this up from the diagram every single time. It would have been cool if there was just a fold-out like poster or something to keep it straight. I can forgive that because I can see where they're coming from on it. Less so on the play area. I actually just made my own because you really need them to keep everything straight. So I just got out a piece of paper, copied down their diagram. This is what it looks like when you're actually using it. See, I got my crystals, which are on the card. I got my guy's level right here. I would put in units he controls here. I draw my tactics. I discard my tactics. I got my skills. This is what it looks like when it's being played. So there's not a ton going on here, like it's not super busy, but you need to keep it all straight, otherwise it'll get confusing. That's what the board will look like once you finally set it up. So here's the overall review. 4 out of 5. The game itself is solid. It has good rule writing. You can tell a board game has good mechanics behind it because you have the basic idea of what's trying to happen in your head. You don't have to constantly refer to the rulebook for all the ins and outs. It has conceptual hooks that you use to remember what the rules are. Mage Knight has a ton of those. Once you learn the rules, you'll know the rules. If I waited a couple weeks, played another game, I wouldn't have to do that much reading on anything except the setup. The rules writing itself, very bad. For $75, I expect a little proofreading in the rulebook. There are literally paragraphs that end with a word and just don't connect anywhere. That's unacceptable. I don't want typos. Also, there shouldn't be 2 rulebooks, neither of which are complete. The walkthrough is not just a walkthrough, it's actually a rulebook. There's a significant time investment involved in learning the game because of the rule writing. But once you do, I think you'll find actually the game goes surprisingly quickly. Playtime for the opening mission, because you're getting a hang of it, it's like an hour and a half, but I could see later games going faster than that. I would recommend this game, 4 out of 5 overall. It's a lot of fun to play. The trick is not to be intimidated by the requirements, which are size and rule related. And in a general note, as far as Mage Knight itself, I'm a little leery of the direction that the fluff is taking. For example, a Mage Knight is now a thing, which is sort of like buying the IP for War Machine and then making a game about war machines instead of jacks, but we'll leave that alone. Everything looks good, production values for this company are high, the clicks are weird, but I'm looking forward to see what they come out with Mage Knight 3.0.